Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
What if
Jonny
I just
Phillips,
left?
thank you so much for being on the Mike Litton Experience, bud. I really appreciate you, and I'm super excited to have our listeners get a chance to get to know you better. So as you know, as we talked about before we started this, everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And so with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born and then go all the way up to today, and then we can cover anything you'd like to cover that you're working on today and anything you're working on for tomorrow, okay?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Thanks for being here, buddy. I appreciate you. All right, so where were you born?
I was born in Ohio.
Okay.
And I grew up in a super small town, like 900, there was 900 people in the town.
That's small.
And yeah, it was like a K through 12 school. So like the whole town was in, all the school kids were in one building,
Oh, wow.
kindergarten through senior year. So I went, I graduated with a class of 43 kids.
Wow.
And like 35 out of the 43 had been there since kindergarten.
Okay.
So it was like, it was very like different childhood than you normally like observe in your average American life. But I appreciated it. I feel like our school, like because they knew you, they knew us like all the way through. So that came with good and bad. So it was really hard to like shake a reputation, because you had no fresh start whatsoever.
You were like one and done, right?
Yeah. But in terms of like accountability, it was really good because observing some of the other like schools around, like they were very like this. It was a public school, but they were very like disciplined, and it was high standards. So my parents, though, like the reason we grew up there, like my parents worked for a church,
Okay.
and it was like outside the town a little bit. And so like, grew up in like their church world, for a while. And, I think over time, like, I wanted to get out. I knew like I didn't necessarily want to stay, but I was in athletics and ran cross country, track, was like super devoted runner for a long time, and long distance running specifically. You would like this actually. Our high school weren't big enough to have a football team, because like we were just so small. Like basketball was our thing, but we like made a shirt as a joke, and it said like New Knoxville football undefeated since 1924.
I love it. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was a funny joke, because like every other school in our conference had a football team, but we just made a shirt saying, "Hey, we've never lost." So
that's right. Never won either, but we never lost.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Cool,
yeah. So my life was like headed on a. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
Yeah, I would say like I didn't have like a real like big direction in my life. I kind of like had my parents to look at, and then my brother to look at. So I was wanting to like study exercise science in college just because I really liked running. And, my dad, was like, if you want to go to college, like, I'm not going to sign on any student loans for you. So, you're going to have to figure out a way to pay for it, like, if you want to go. And, because we didn't make a lot of money growing up. And so I like, well, I could join the army, the recruiters, like, that was like kind of a way that a lot of, kids who maybe didn't have like a clear path, like career path they wanted to do or whatever. So I was about a week away from swearing in to the army my senior year of high school. And then I called my wife, like, well, this is like a funny story, but because this is where my wife like kind of comes into the picture, like my senior year and sorry, this, I feel like I go back to talk about the prom. Man, I'm like all over the place. This is funny.
You're all right. You're all right.
So
this is your life. We can go all over. We're good.
So, what this, happening, sort of in parallel, but just a pertinent fact was, I met my now wife, Bethany, when I was 14 years old. Like, we grew up in the same church, and, but like her parents were doing, working for the church in different parts of the country. And they would come into the main location in Ohio and for conferences and whatnot. So we became really close friends, throughout the years, but nothing really romantic, anything like that. And then my senior prom was coming up, and I was gonna ask this girl, Becca, to the prom. And like I said, I was telling you, I ran track. So my best friend Tim and I drove Tim home from school every day. And it was a Monday, I remember, from track practice. We were driving home, and he's like, "Hey, Johnny, who are you gonna ask to prom?" It's like, "Well, I'm thinking about asking Becca." And he's like, "Oh, cool." Nothing else happened. And then the weekend coming up, there was a big like conference event with the church coming up. So a lot of people are coming in town on the weekend, but on Thursday night, like, just for the people who lived there, they had an event. So me, Tim, and Becca are all hanging out like upstairs at the church, and then I go downstairs because someone was calling my name, and then come back up a few minutes later. Becca asked me, "Hey, who are you gonna ask to prom? Like, or who are you gonna go to prom with?" Yeah, I kind of, get a little nervous. I'm like, I don't know. She's like, "Well, whoever you go with, like, you should go with me and Tim to dinner and go together." And I was like, I looked at Tim. I was like, "Oh, betrayal."
No kidding.
Yeah, it was just
wow. Snake that deal, didn't
he? Yeah. So my brain is like racing, to like, oh my gosh, like, what am I gonna do? Like, I didn't really have anyone else in mind. And like, I believe that it was like divine inspiration that like Bethany popped into my head, because there was no logical reason that I would think of her like with my senior prom. Like, she was a few years older, living on her own in North Carolina, like, states away. I was like, maybe I'll just call her. So then I called her, and we ended up hanging out that weekend, and it sparked, something romantic. And then from there, I like stopped. I called my recruiter in the Army and said, I really just want to like see where this goes. And so I like backed out of swearing in. Like, I literally had my like swearing in date like scheduled. And then I went on a missions trip for 6 months. Like after I graduated high school, I went to Austin, Texas after that. And that was like really the main time in my life that I was like, on my own in a sense.
Mhm.
And then relationship with my wife progressed, and we got engaged the year I came back, and then moved up to Rochester, New York together, and lived there for 5 years. And that's kind of where I like got into sales, like, more production oriented, like income earning. And I worked in car sales for a couple of years in Rochester, and that was like really where I feel like I cut my teeth a lot in sales. And then we moved out here in 2017, and I worked in car sales for like 6 months, and like hated it. It was like very different being out here than in New York. Like in New York, it was kind of more like small town, like relational. I don't know if you can hear those dogs. Sorry, there's like a
Oh, you're
dog
fine.
barking.
You're fine. Don't worry about it. Keep going.
But like out here, it's just there's so many people that live here,
Right.
and something that like it felt just like it's much more about commodity, rather than like where I came from. It was just much more service oriented.
Mhm.
There was only a couple dealers in town, and so like you really didn't have as many people just like shopping so cutthroat.
Mhm.
But so I gave myself a challenge of like I want to just like be number one, prove to myself I can do it. So I was the number one sales guy a couple months in a row, but just like burned out. I mean, it's like it's really it's a grind in
Was that in
the car
Rochester?
business. No, that was here in
So
San Diego.
where were you when you were out here? Where were you when you became number one?
It was sales, like the car sales, like
Oh, gotcha.
for I worked for Honda.
Okay.
So that's like
Which Honda dealer?
Mossy in Lemon
Oh, okay.
Grove.
Okay. I know
Yeah.
Mossy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's funny because now I drive by it every day
Yeah.
when I go home from work. We live in La Mesa now.
Yeah.
And so kind of the funny little story about how I got into real estate, and then it's a pretty easy summary after I got into real estate. But the I quit, like my wife, I was like really, I would say depressed from like going at 8 a.m. to the dealership, and you'd work till 8 p.m.
Mhm.
There's called a bell shift, bell to bell. But the thing is if you sold a car, you'd have to stay there till the customer leaves
Right.
with their car. So if you sell a car at 7 or 7:30, even 8:30,
You could be there
they're
till
not.
10.
Yeah, like there was a lot of nights where I was there till like 11 or 12 p.m. And then I'd have wake up at 6:37 the next day, do it again. But I was, my main motivation for wanting to stay was like, to help my wife and I like be like financially secure moving to a new state. I wanted her to feel safe and comfortable.
Mhm.
And so I remember walking from work or walking past her in the bathroom one day, and it was like halfway through the month. Normally, and for context, normally halfway through the month, I'd have already sold like, 12 to 14 cars, at that point. And she was like, hey, like, how you doing? And I'm like, I'm okay. And she's like, how many cars have you sold this month so far? I was like, 2. And she was like, oh, okay, well, have a good day. And I remember like I said like a prayer in my head. I was like, I just want my wife, like if my wife could like just feel comfortable with me leaving this,
Mhm.
I would leave it in a heartbeat.
Right.
But that was just in my head. And then like 30 minutes, I'm at work, 30 minutes later, she calls me. She's like, I feel like you should quit your job. And I was like,
Wow.
I'm listening.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wanted to make sure she felt good. She
Right.
felt comfortable. It's like, what's making you say that? And she's like, I just feel like you need to be like free of this. And, it was a very unique thing. And I ended up quitting that day, which I'd never done before.
Wow.
Like I had always like, stayed and, really tried to learn and maximize in a place, but it was like, I didn't have anything else to go to. So it's like, we talked about it for, half an hour just of like, okay, this is like what we're going to do next. And like, I'm going to devote my time to like finding a job.
Yeah.
So I quit and
Wow.
it was like, oh, it's kind of stressful. And, I like applied to so many jobs. I remember like, I don't know if you know what ZipRecruiter is, but like you can one click apply. And like I literally applied to probably 100 jobs just because you can like click.
Right.
Like let's just see what comes back.
Right.
And I found a couple like specifics. I was like, oh, like this is interesting.
Yeah.
I had an interview at this like tech company, and it was just doing like tech support stuff, which I had done in the past. And I remember I really liked it. Like I liked a lot of the things, but it was a very like modest salary. It was like 40 grand a year. Like not much at all, but like it in my like up until like moving here and like really like starting to like produce more, like up until that point I'd only made like the most I made in a year was like $37,000, like my income.
Yeah.
And I think I was 25 at the time. And so they offered me 40, and I knew like that wasn't going to be able to go very far in San Diego, but we had a great rental and like cheap rental. And I was so desperate for like relief too from this like nightmare schedule. It was like 9 to 5, and I was like, oh, like this would be great. And
Yeah, that'd be cruising.
yeah, like 401k, PTO, all this like stuff. And I remember like after the interview, I walked in the parking lot. I said another prayer. I was like, God, if this is not for me, just have them say no. Because if they say yes, I'm gonna take this job.
Right.
Like I like if that's what I'm gonna do.
Right.
And sure enough, like a few days later, they emailed me and said, we chose someone else. I was pretty disappointed. I was like, dang, like what the heck? So the next day though, I get a call. It's from this like real estate investment company. They're like, hey, we saw your application and we're interested in talking more. Like, I'm like, ooh, I'm so sorry. Like, can you remind me? Because remember, I like applied to like so many jobs. And they were like, hey, like you can this is what we do. First year associates make 50 to 60K a year. And by year 2 or 3, our associates can typically make $200,000 to $300,000 a year. Is that something that would interest
got
you?
your attention. That got your attention.
Yeah, I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I would be interested in that. So I went in for an interview, and then I did like a full day shadow with them, and they offered me a job, but I had to get my real estate license. And so the next like 4 months I like studied and took my, waited to take my test. And that was like a really good like reset period in my life, where I was like, okay, like I'm like doing something different. Like this is a career, like, shift. And, I was going all in. It was like, full time. And, so that's kind of where I really learned this, investment side of things. I started off in dispositions and then acquisitions, really just cut my teeth with like deal underwriting. talking, with sellers and agents and investors, and I did pretty well with the company. I think when I left, I was number 2 in our office, and I remember one of the things that like stuck with me in terms of like, I was like, oh, maybe I'm kind of good at this. Like sometimes you don't know until you like sometimes see like data in front of you. And one of the metrics, I don't know if you ever tracked this, but like the contract close ratio. So, average KPI for that is 75%. You want to close, 3 out of 4 contracts that you get.
Right.
And, that was our goal too, as a company. And, you go up the list, there's all the reps are on the board. You got guys at like 40%, 45, 50, 55, 60. The second highest person on the list was like 69% close ratio.
Yeah.
And then I saw, it was like me, number 1 at like 90, I think it was 97% close rate. I was like,
that's big.
huh, that is not like the rest. And I just realized like my way of doing like business was just, a little different. It was much more like straightforward and transparent with people about the process, about like and people responded well to that. And I went on my own after in 2020, before in January of 2020, actually. I resigned on January 31st, 2020. Actually, that's a good story too. I might as well just say that.
Tell us the story. We're all about.
So my wife's brother was telling me about his work. He works for Dave Ramsey. Very, you either love him or you hate him.
Yeah.
But he's just a strong personality, strong like culture in his sphere. So he has like an all hands meeting at his companies, and one of the things he says, because he's a Christian, and he tells him, he's like, hey, you don't have to work here to get to heaven. So like this job does not equal like spirituality, in terms of like your goodness. And but then he says, if your spirit has left the building, please take your body with it.
Right.
He's like, I need people here who are like in it.
Yeah.
And so that was, January 25th or whatever. January 30th, we have our first sonogram appointment because Bethany is pregnant with our first child.
Yeah.
And I remember you're like, you don't know what, you're like, oh, okay, this is like crazy. And we're so excited, they put the thing like on her stomach to look for the baby. And then like she keeps looking, and then she's like, I'm gonna go get the nurse, or get like the doctor. And so I just remember like we're both like looking at each other like, oh God. And I'm actually like I still remember like where I felt it the most. I feel it actually right now.
Yeah.
But just this like pit, and the doctor comes in, she does it again, and she just looks at us and like, this is the least favorite part of my job. We just like sink.
Yeah.
And like, she just tells us it's it could be like a miscarriage. And and so we're just like crushed. And they, by law, they like scheduled or I don't know if it's a law, honestly, but they scheduled like a confirmation appointment.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.